Shalom, welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. Welcome to our Torah study, our weekly Torah study that we do from home. Pleasure to join you tonight. We do these from home, but we encourage you to connect with us in the comments section below or reach out to us using email. And we would love to interact with you and dialogue with you on any of the material and content and discussion that we have. So reach out to us. Another suggestion is that you subscribe to these videos so you can be up on the content and get notifications when these videos are published. Our weekly Torah study is published sometime in the middle of the week, providing there aren't any holidays. And so as the Hanukkah holidays are coming up, we'll see how we do. But for the most part, we're able to get these out sometime in the middle of the week. And then we also have our services, our Shabbat services are on our YouTube channel. So if you've come to this by a circuitous manner, you can click on our channel and get to know us and look at our videos there. We also have our Revelation teaching series with Rabbi Jim, who is going through Revelation. And you're welcome to participate in that series as well. Okay, so what I want to do then is continue this evening. We are in Parshat 8, Vayishlach. He sent from Bereshit, from Genesis chapter 32 through chapter 36, beginning in verse 4 and continuing chapter 36, verse 43. We begin with a summary sometimes on these things. And what we have is after Jacob has met with Lavan, his father-in-law, he is headed home. And the first thing that he has to deal with is the fact that the last time he heard from Esau was trying to kill him. And Jacob has not been home since. So Jacob sends messengers to approach Esau, and the messengers come back and they let him know that Esau is approaching him with 400 men. So the word has gone out that Jacob is on his way back and Esau is on his way with 400 men. Jacob takes the strategic initiative and begins to separate and divide up his people and his flocks, and basically sets up this parade of offerings in the hopes of appeasing Esau. That night he is praying for assistance and praying for deliverance from the wrath of Esau. And that night Jacob sends his family across the brook, across the ford, and Jacob is left alone, and he wrestles with a man, it says in the text. Although Jacob doesn't let go, it's difficult to figure out who won this contest, and Jacob walks away with a limp. As a result of this encounter with this man, or angel as it may be, Jacob's name in the future has been changed to Israel, and he has said that he has prevailed against man and against God. The brothers Esau and Jacob meet, and they are reconciled, but Jacob still doesn't want to live with Esau, and so they live apart. And they travel down to Shechem, they travel down to the land, and Shechem, a local prince, abducts and violates Dinah and Jacob's daughter, and then declares that he wants to marry her. This Canaanite prince and his father suggest that the families intermarry, but Jacob's sons pull a trick on the entire town. At first they pretend to be in agreement, but they insist that the entire town must be circumcised. And when everyone is circumcised and recovering from their circumcision, the two sons, Shimon and Levi, come in and massacre the entire town, execute all the men of that town. This action is given as a response to the fact that they violated the sister and treated her like a prostitute. Adonai again appears to Jacob and confirms the change of Jacob's name to Israel. And then Rachel goes into labor and gives birth to Benjamin, the 12th son of Jacob, the 12th of the tribes. And she dies in this childbirth and is buried in Ephraim, outside of Bethlehem. Isaac passes away finally at the age of 180 and is buried by his sons. And then the Parsha concludes with a summary of Esau's descendants. That's the 2-minute recap of the Torah portion. Again, we've been referencing Or Sameach International, which is a teaching ministry online. You can find their materials, and we refer to their summaries from time to time because they do a good job of going through summarizing the Parsha in just a few minutes. All right. One of the very first things that I'd like to deal with this week, and we're just going to kind of touch on a couple items out of this Parsha. But one of the very first things that I want to talk about is at the end of the previous Parsha, Jacob meets with angels. And these angels meet him after he leaves Lavan. And he takes, at the beginning of this, well, in chapter 32, it says angels meet him on the way. The Ubo Malache Elohim, messengers of Adonai. And this is in verse 1 of chapter 32. They meet him on the way, and then in verse 3, we have this line, Vayishlach Yaakov Melachim Lepaneh. And in literal translation, he sent messengers. This is the Vayishlach, where the title of the Parsha comes from. But he sent these messengers, he was sending these messengers to meet with Esau. The word for messengers, though, in this line is melachim, the same as in the previous line where it says uvo melachim uvel melache Elohim, messengers of Adonai. So we have twice this which is frequently used referring to angels. Contrast this down with verse 16 again in chapter 32, where it's speaking of servants. The servants were sent with gifts to Esau. The word for servant there is abada. Vayeten beyad abada. So it was that Jacob sent his servants to Esau with gifts. What I'm pointing out here is the very real possibility. The text certainly allows for the possibility that it may have been angels that Jacob dispatched to give a message of peace to Esau, or to ascertain what Esau's intentions were, which really brings up some interesting discussion. What do we do with this? Perhaps angels were part of this whole narrative from the time they left Lavan, coming across the Yabok, the brook, wrestling on the bank, and so forth. Perhaps these angels are a part of the landscape when Jacob is coming back into the land. Remember that some 400 years after this, we see Joshua coming across the Jordan, and the captain of the hosts of heaven are there at the battle of Jericho. Perhaps the land, Eretz Israel, is guarded over and watched over by these melachim, these angelic messengers of Adonai. There is a nuance here. The hosts of heaven, which is more of a military term, which would be applied to, say, an army or a battalion of soldiers. It seems like there is a distinction, perhaps, between messenger of Adonai, melachim, or melach Elohim, versus the hosts, as it's the Tzvot that we see in the narrative with Joshua coming in to the Battle of Jericho. But either way, it seems that there is something to this idea of the angelic messengers watching over the land of Israel. It also calls to mind for me, though, the reference after when Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, Gan Eden, that there were cherubim that were placed on the path and a flaming sword that pointed every way in order to guard the way to the tree of life. And here we have on the journey going into Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, we have, of course, these angelic messengers, these Malach Elohim. So just a compelling discussion and thought on that. Appreciate any comments you might have if you have any. Moving on. So what we have here is that Jacob is going to prepare for this meeting with Esau, and in doing so, he begins to line up the offerings and different creative abilities, ways to placate his brother Esau. Remember, he has not seen his brother Esau since he stole his blessing. This face-to-face meeting with Esau is compelling to me, like twins in the womb. They were twins in the womb. Remember, twins in the womb are going to be face-to-face even from the womb. As a father of twin daughters, we have twin daughters that are 19 years old, and they are very much face-to-face. They have a special bond. Even now, as one of them lives on the east coast of Florida and the other is in Missouri, they're still face-to-face, and they're still very much connected with each other. So Jacob is preparing to meet with this Esau, coming face-to-face, and Esau, it says in the text, is coming with his 400 men. What is this 400 men referring to? Why 400? Why such a unique number? Consider, if you will, that Jacob and Esau, let's just consider them as equals. Let's imagine them as equal brothers. We could talk about them from the perspective of the favored, or we could talk about them from the perspective of the anointed, or even talk about them from the perspective of the Bechor, the firstborn, or the one who received the Bechor, the blessing and the birthright. But let's for the sake of this discussion just consider them as equals. They're equals. Consider the sun and the moon. Think of the sun and the moon. We know the sun is much larger than the moon. All of us know that the sun is much more significant of a celestial body than the moon. But isn't it fascinating that at sunset and at moonrise, don't the sun and the moon look the same? They're apparently equals, but they look the same size in the sky. This is why we get an eclipse. You wouldn't have an eclipse unless the sun and the moon were the same size. They appear to be the same size in the sky, but in reality, and this is the fascinating part, the sun is actually 400 times farther away than the moon. And the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. So we need these two numbers, these two 400 numbers, to find a ratio that allows for the two celestial bodies to be the same size in the sky, such that if the moon and the sun were equidistant from us, in other words, they were the same distant, then we'd have a tiny moon and a great big sun. Likewise, if the sun and the moon were the same size, but the sun was farther away, the sun would be very tiny in the sky and the moon would not. But what we have is we have the sun and the moon, and the sun being 400 times farther away from us than the moon, and the size of the sun being 400 times larger than the moon. It's 400-400 ratio. The Jews refer to themselves as the moon and the Gentiles as the sun. The Gentiles appear to be greater on the earth. But what does it say? The prophecy, when the twins are born, before the twins were born, before Jacob and Esau were born, what did it say? It said the greater will serve the younger. The greater, the son, is 400 times the size, but is still the servant of the younger. Notice that the Gentile calendar is built around the passage of the sun, the solar passage, the equinox and the solstice. The Jewish calendar is based around the phases of the moon. Jacob, of course, representing the Jews, Esau, of course, representing the Gentiles. And this is what we have. We have this number of 400 that allows us to see in the sky these two celestial bodies apparently equal. But it's only after some discussion that we realize that the greater will serve the younger. Indeed, the nearness of the moon has the effect on the seas, and the size of the sun has the effect on the atmosphere, which is a fascinating sort of division of resources. What does Jacob say to Esau? Jacob and Esau meet, and what does Jacob say to Esau? Jacob says, "Take these gifts, I have everything." And so that's what is the net effect here. Jacob is acknowledging that I have everything. By everything, he would perhaps mean that he has the blessings of Adonai. Remember, at this point, even after his brother's birthright and after his father's blessing, and then his second blessing, because remember we talked about this, Jacob gets two blessings out of this whole deal. He gets the birthright and two blessings, gets a double portion, if you will. It is Esau who gets one blessing, and it's a diminished blessing at that. And then what does Jacob say to Esau when they meet? He says, "Take these gifts, I have everything." All right, but before that, chapter 32. Jacob is going to meet with Esau, but the night before, the stage is set. It's obvious that there's going to be a confrontation. The night before, Jacob gets up, and I'm just going to read to you from chapter 32, this remarkable passage, starting from the Hebrew reference, verse 23, in your English translation, it's probably verse 22. Speaking of Jacob, he got up that night, took his 2 wives, his 2 slave girls, and his 11 children, and forded the Jabbok. Verse 24, he took them and sent them across the stream, then sent his possessions across. And Yaakov was left alone. Then some man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he did not defeat Yaakov, he struck Yaakov's hip socket so that his hip was dislocated while wrestling with him. The man said, "Let me go, because it's daybreak." But Yaakov replied, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" And he answered, "Yaakov." Then the man said, "From now on you will no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and men, and have prevailed." Yaakov asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why are you asking about my name?" and blessed him there. Verse 31, Yaakov called the place Peniel, the face of God, because I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. Verse 32, as the sun rose upon him, he went past Peniel, limping at the hip. So let's talk about this man Jacob. Jacob is an interesting character in among the 3, the patriarchs. He has some flaws. He's got some difficulties. We see at birth that he grabs the heel of his brother as he comes out. Many people think of his name Jacob as heel grabber, and that is an indicator of perhaps him being opportunist and grabbing at life. But another way to look at it is the word Yaakov is similar to the word for the ankle. It means crooked. Where there's a bent, it means bent, a place where the foot or the leg is bent. Your leg goes down and then turns. It's bent, indicating perhaps some of Jacob's character. Jacob presents himself as an opportunist. He has a brother who's obviously a fool and scorns the birthright, and he trades him for a bowl of soup. Esau walked into it, but it's the indication of a person who's an opportunist, who's grasping, who's trying to gather what he can of life. Then later we have the episode with the blessing, where he took the blessing from his father and deceived his father and presented himself as Esau. His mother set up the scenario, but the sages talk about how Jacob is the one who lied. Jacob was the one who actually turned the tide to this scenario, and saved the scenario, and managed to sway Isaac and deceive Isaac. If you believe that sort of version of the story, there's also an interpretation of the story that Isaac had no intention of giving Esau the Bechor, but that Isaac had reserved the Bechor for Jacob, and I think we talked about that in a previous teaching. So we have the opportunism here in taking the blessing, and then Jacob, of course, is going to go to his uncle's house, and as he leaves, runs away from his brother's murderous threats, he comes along upon the dream of the ladder, and the ladder going up to heaven, and he says, "The cent of all you give me, I will return to you." He offers to tithe the 10% back to Adonai, which would be a little bit like me saying to the richest man in the world, "If you bless me, I will give you 10% back." It's a little opportunist. I understand he's penniless and he has nothing, and he's saying, "Well, Adonai, if you bless me, then you will bless me." But it's interesting to me that that he says, "I will return 10% to you for all that you bless me." There's almost a presumptuousness there that he's going to be blessed. Again, going on to this narrative with Laban, sure, yes, Laban was dishonest with him, and perhaps deceived him as well, or certainly deceived him as well. But the opportunism is ongoing with Laban as well. Jacob is very creative and probably never at fault for anything that he did with Laban. But boy, the psychology is apparent. He's in full character mode here, with being a little bit pushing the envelope, so to speak. Okay, this is some of Jacob's character that is revealed when he was born, and of course in the actions and decisions. All right, I have a book. I like books. Here's a book. Can you read that? All right, this is called The Crossing, The Struggle for Identity. It's by an author, Skip Moen. Little book, as you can see, just not even barely over 100 pages if you count the poem at the end and some of the reference pages. But boy, a lot of material in this book, and this is written by Skip Moen, very deep thinker. He quotes a bunch from Sarna, if you're familiar with Nahum Sarna, if you're into intertextuality, biblical intertextuality, these sort of criticisms and discussions of the text. Nahum Sarna is probably a good read, and Skip Moen quotes from him. This book is about the struggle for identity. Is about essentially the crossing, the wrestling at the Jabbok crossing, the ford. Would encourage you to pick up a copy of this if you can. Skip is a good thinker and a good source for a lot of discussion. All of his books I would recommend. So I'm borrowing and referencing a little bit of this book in this discussion tonight. So here's the thing: Jacob was fighting a battle with his identity his whole life. After all his wealth, after being surrounded by angels, promises, and blessings, what does Jacob say when he wrestles with the man? "I will not go until you bless me." Now at this point it's questionable, but it appears to indicate that Jacob doesn't know exactly who this person is or who this man is. He's just somebody to wrestle with. Multiple times in the text, somebody will be visited by an angel and not realize it until the angel leaves, and then the character will realize that he's been visited by Adonai or by the angel. And so here we have Jacob being presented with this man, and immediately there's a wrestling, there's a grappling, and Jacob is going after more. "I will not go until bless me. What more could Jacob want? And the man says, what is your name? He says to Jacob. The man said, let me go because it's daybreak. And Jacob replies, I will not go unless you bless me. The man asked, what is your name? And he answered, Jacob. And it's this idea that, what is your name? Your name is Jacob. It's the name you've had all your life. It's who you are. It's your identity. You have become all of your life who you are. And he wrestles with him all night in order to gain a blessing. He's unwilling to let go. It becomes a collision with Jacob's character. So Adonai changes Jacob's name in the midst of this wrestling. His name will now be Israel, which, if we know what that is, the name Israel means one who challenges or strives with Adonai or wrestles with Adonai. Why is it that he wrestles? Why is it that the name of Jacob is changed to wrestling with Adonai? Why is it that the name of Israel is going to be known as wrestles with Adonai? What's happening here? What's being said here? Jacob calls the place Peniel, the face of God, because he says he saw God face to face. Now, what does it mean to be face to face with somebody? What do we think of when we're face to face with somebody? Consider that you're behind someone. Someone is walking, somebody is going somewhere, somebody is doing something, and you're behind them. Or consider that you're walking or going somewhere or doing something and that person is behind you. It's very distinctive, isn't it? It just means something when you're behind somebody. It means something when somebody is behind you. Imagine somebody at your side. What does it mean when somebody is at your side? There's kind of a partnership going on at your side. They're kind of together. The two are working together, becoming one. What does it mean when somebody is to your face? When somebody is to your face? What does that mean? There's a sense of questioning and inquiring. In other words, if I were to walk up to you, and I just walked up to your face and didn't say anything, what would I be communicating? It might be a question. It might be an inquiry, like, who are you? Or how are you? And if I knew you and I paused and I went face to face, if I knew you, then what would that be but me wanting to see what's happening? It's an inquiry. It's a questioning. All right. What's another thing that happens when two people are face to face? Well, it's a challenging, it's an opposing, it's argumentative, it's butting heads, it's face to face, it's a fight, it's a conflict. Another thing that is face to face is communication, words. Words are exchanged face to face. So we consider these things when we're thinking of what it means to be face to face with someone. He says he saw God face to face. Also consider the erzo kenegdo from Bereshit, from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 and 20. The erzo kenegdo, the suitable companion, the companion to my face, is what it means in the Hebrew. Most of your translations will call this the suitable companion, but in the Hebrew it means the companion to your face. What is it about this companion, the husband and the wife? We've talked about this at great length. It is that when we are together, we're going to complement each other. Face to face is a complementary posture, unless it's not. You see, we're good, except when we're not. We're communicating except when we're not. We're on the same page except when we're not. Yes, I want to see my wife face to face. I want her eyes to be on my eyes. I want to see her eyes with my eyes. And I want to see that connection face to face except when I don't. And when do I not want that? But when there's conflict, when there's a problem, when I'm being opposed, when there's opposition in the relationship, when it's oppositional. Consider Adonai. Consider Adonai, who promises to bless Israel. But if they oppose Adonai, he will oppose them. We talked at length about Egypt and Sodom, how these were allowed for a time to flaunt Adonai before his judgment. But then shortly after there was the judgment of Adonai. But for a time at least, they were allowed to flaunt Adonai. But the Jews, they were disciplined and judged for their idolatry. And they returned time and time again, but they were returned by Adonai and by his grace. Where is Sodom today? Were they allowed to return? No, when they were judged, they were judged. And that's just the end of it. But the Jews were allowed to return. Adonai brought Israel, Jacob, my servant, he brought them back to the land and back to the covenant again and again. And even at the end of all this, I mean, even in Jeremiah when it says that he will write a new covenant, and what is that covenant? But the same law, the same understanding, the same knowledge of God, and it's a covenant with the same people. It's a covenant with the Jews. A covenant with Israel. All right. So Israel was disciplined and judged for their idolatry. Just like a spouse. You know, your spouse, for the most part, in most relationships, hopefully, your spouse doesn't leave you. But boy, they sure do oppose you when they think you're in the wrong. Do you see that? Adonai is not going to give up on us. But he opposes us when we're wrong. He just does. And I think that's missing in the world today, in the idea of understanding Adonai, that many times people think that Adonai is just loving and lovable and gracious. That's the big thing. We have a preoccupation with grace and forgiveness in the kingdom of Adonai these days. And I don't know if people understand how oppositional Adonai is when we engage in idolatry. What is the modern form of idolatry? It's self-exaltation, it's self-worship, it's self-promotion. The modern form of idolatry. What does it mean to dedicate and bring my resources to a little pagan figurine in a pagan temple somewhere? But I'm exalting that pagan figurine. It's kind of going through the motions, and I make some sort of sacrifice to it, and I go through the motions. Do I really think it matters? I don't know. Maybe it does. And that's the pagan approach to worshiping the idol. But what do? In modern life, we promote and exalt the self. And we are belligerent to exalt the self, such that everything revolves around the self. All right. And I think we lose our sense that Adonai might oppose us, especially those of us who are his people. There is a distinction in the text, in the Bible, of whether or not Adonai disciplines those who haven't received him. You could make a fair case for this idea that Adonai will let those of the sinners, those of the world, those evil ones, he'll let them go and be evil. But for those who are his children, he disciplines those he loves. Isn't that what the text tells us? So I think we need to revisit this idea of opposition, this idea of Adonai opposing us. But isn't it our nature, when we are opposed by God, to keep wrestling, to keep pushing, to keep striving, to keep persuading? We pray more, we pray harder, we try harder, we try to make it happen on our own. We wrestle with it. All right. Look at the history of Israel, from antiquity to modernity. throughout the entire history from Abraham until today. It is a struggle of identity. Who is Israel, and what will it be, and what will it look like? We have another identity struggle in our modern times. The area of human sexuality has become a battleground of identity. What is the essence of this battleground? It is that of redefining sexuality, of chafing against the created order. Our sexuality is designed to be the erzo conegdo. It is the suitable companion. It is a companion to my face. Our sexuality is meant to be a complementary identity, the companion to my face. In other words, we are defined by each other. I am defined by you, and you are defined by me. We define each other. This struggle for identity is to redefine it in terms not of what I was created for, but to redefine it in terms of what I would prefer, such that in a real, obvious and overt sense, the man was made to be the giver and the woman was made to be the receiver. We talked about that in emotional terms and in spiritual terms, but is also there in sexual terms as well. And yet we are trying to redefine sexuality. So what do you do with it? If two women are together in some kind of sexual expression, what happens to the egg? What's the purpose of the egg? Where is that considered in this relationship, in this dynamic? If two men are with each other in some sexual expression, what then is the purpose of the sperm, the seed? What is the purpose of this? It has no purpose now. We've redefined it in terms away from its created order, and not in terms of what it was created for. So that is the battleground that we're continuing to wrestle on now, and we're willing to do any kind of barbaric sort of creative solutions, surgical, otherwise, chemical, in order to fight against our created identity. All right, continuing on. Man was made out of earth, it says in Genesis. When Jacob wrestled, the Hebrew word for wrestled is vayabech, which only occurs in this place in the entire Tanakh. It's a very unusual word. It appears twice in this passage, but it appears nowhere else, and it appears to be from an unused or out of use word. The only place we see a hint of this, and again this comes from Skip Moen and from Sarna, I believe this comes from Sarna, is the only place we see this is in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, chapter 3, verse 6, and we have this reference to fragrant powders, powder, perfume dust. What is the Hebrew word? The abchat, fragrant powders, dust, if you will. What is this dust? The dust is akin to the dust of the earth. What happens when two people wrestle? What happens when they grapple and they wrestle with each other? Well, what we see when two people wrestle is the dust starts to fly. In fact, that's what we call it in our language. We call it a dust up, right? That's the language we use when we refer to two people wrestling or fighting. So yeah, there is a dust up. There is a wrestling here. But further than that, yes, and the dust starts to fly and this kind of thing. Okay. But further than that, what happens to somebody when they wrestle? When they wrestle in the dirt? They begin to look like the dirt. They begin to be covered in dirt. And what would happen if you wrestled for an extended period of time? Wouldn't your clothes become torn and torn off of you? And now your bare skin becomes covered in the dirt. What is it beginning to look like now? It's beginning to look like Jacob looking like Adam. Perhaps even before the fall, when he had skins made for them, before Adonai made them some sort of coverings. Do you see that connection there? Fascinating. When Adam was formed out of the clay, what did he first look like as he was being formed, as he was going through whatever that creation was. It says he was formed out of the dirt, so there must have been a forming. It wasn't like he just spoke him into the being the way Adonai said, let there be light. He formed him out of the dust. And what do we have here? We have Jacob being reformed. His identity is being reset. He started out trying to steal or take or demand a blessing from this visitor, which is fascinating in and of itself. What, you see a stranger walking along the bank and you walk up to him and demand a blessing, and he says no, so you grab him? I don't understand this. There had to have been something compelling about the man that made him want to grab onto him. I'll share this with you, and this comes from a very personal place. My father passed away last year in September, so it's been a little over a year. And like all of us, especially in the last year, many of us have lost friends and family, and it's been a difficult year for many of us. So when my father passed, so closed my relationship with my father, and he and I had some unfinished business. Like most relationships are complex, most relationships have some baggage, some history, and ours wasn't unlike that. And over the course of the previous 2 or 3 years, he and I had talked a number of times about wanting to work some things out and kind of resolve some things and talk about some things. And we had just never really been able to find the time. We had our contacts and our casual conversations, but we just had some unfinished business. And we both knew it, and we briefly mentioned it and said, yeah, we'll deal with that. And when he came down and he was diagnosed with cancer, and he passed away from cancer in less than 40 days. It was very sudden, very quick. It was probably developing for a year in his body, but that's what happens, and he passed very, very quickly. And we had some unfinished business. If I were to see my father walking along the road or walking in the yard or something like this today, I would be compelled to grab him and hold on to him and say, we have unfinished business, and not let go. There would be something automatic and visceral that I would want to do. I would want to grab onto him and say, we have unfinished business, I'm not letting go. And I think that speaks to me, at least, of my personal experience, of what I see happening with Jacob here in the man. There was something compelling about the man that made Jacob tie him up, wrap him up, grab onto him. Where you put your arms around him and you do the hold, and you're not letting go, and you wrestle. And I just think that maybe that's a powerful image. That idea of unfinished business, that idea of compelling, immediate. Wait, no, I have to grab onto this and not let go. And sure, he demanded a blessing because he was used to demanding blessings. But then he says, let go, and he says, I refuse to let go. And then the dawn came, and still Jacob wouldn't let go until the visitor injured his leg. And then he was able to walk away. Jacob's identity is being reset here. He is being remade. He is becoming a new man. He's being given a new identity. And what's fascinating to me is that you read the subsequent pages and Jacob doesn't get it right. In fact, you could argue Jacob never gets it right. Long and sorrowful have been the days of my life, Jacob tells Pharaoh when he goes down to Joseph in Egypt. Long and sorrowful. Yeah, I understand that. But here in this moment on the bank, when his name was changed to Israel, when the future was settled as he's coming into the land, he is becoming a new man. And I submit to you that the wrestling, the dust, is a form of a mikvah. We think of mikvah as being immersed in the water, being immersed in the water and coming up out of the water into new life. And what I'm proposing to you is, rather than going into the water, that Jacob was going back into the dirt to come up, to be recreated, becoming out of the dirt, out of the earth, into new life, to becoming a new man. And this is the struggle for all of us, to really connect with Adonai, and yet at the same time to be belligerent in those areas that are broken and injured, and to say, I'm not letting go until you give me a blessing. There's something compelling that makes me tie you up. There's something compelling that makes me wrap you up and not let you go. I once went through a time in my life where I was able to wrestle with Adonai in prayer. And I know many of you have heard that term before. For me, what that meant is I had one prayer. I had one thing that I was dealing with. And I prayed this one prayer. Actually, it was in the form of a paragraph. And I was very thorough, and I wrote this prayer out, and I studied it and made sure it was very well written and very specific. And then I proceeded to pray this prayer for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And what had happened is a friend had suggested that I wrestle with God regarding this one issue, and so I began to do that. And as I began to do that, I'll pull up that prayer for you. Some of you have heard me speak on this prayer before, but I'll go ahead and see if I can find it for your. Let's see if I got it here. It's not going to come up there. Let's try a different place. Maybe it'll come up here. Computers are great. Nope, not coming up there. It's just a matter of time. I can find it. In any case, I began to pray, and I described it to a friend that was that I had wrapped my arms into the folds of Adonai's robe. I wrapped my hands into the folds of his robe, and I began to pray this prayer, and I refused to let go. And there's this idea of tangling my arms into the folds of his robe, and that way there was no way he could push me away or refuse my prayer. I called this a prayer of surrender, and I'll share this with you because this was my wrestling in the dust moment, and this prayer probably was effective at defining my life and redefining my life at that time. I will say that Adonai answered this prayer. So it's called a prayer of surrender, and I had this on a 3x5 note card, and I carried it everywhere in my pocket, and I would pray this several times a day. And outside of that, I would also just pray constantly. I was praying this same prayer over and over again, 3, 4, 5 hours a day sometimes, in order to get Adonai's attention. This is the prayer of surrender. Adonai God, please make my words true. Please make my surrender complete. Because this is the break point. At some point, your belligerence has to resolve itself into surrender, into brokenness. I think it's perfectly appropriate to go to God in that kind of belligerence and demand that Adonai hear your prayers and say, enough, I need to be healed of this brokenness, or I need to be healed of this sin, or I need victory over this in my life, and these kind of things. It's good to be belligerent about those prayers, but understanding that the solution to your belligerence is not Adonai breaking on your behalf, but rather you breaking. So that's what this becomes, is a prayer of surrender. Adonai God, please make my words true. please make my surrender complete. I surrender the entirety of my life, the whole of me, the all of me. I confess this to you, that I have tried to hold my life in my own hands, to define my own self. I confess that I have held my identity, that I have held the definition of me, the essence of my life, in my tiny cupped hands. That I have breathed on it, that I have brooded over it, that I have sought to bring to life that which I determined as my life. And what that is the imagery of the Spirit of God hovering over the surface of the waters, the tohu vavohu in Genesis chapter 1. And it's this idea of me taking my life and putting it in my tiny cupped hands and saying, this is the me, this is me, this is my life, this is what I want. This is the definition of me, and I'm brooding over it, and I'm hovering over it, and I'm trying to bring it to life. I'm trying to make it happen. I'm investing everything in that. So that's why I said I have breathed on it the same way that the Ruach breathed on the surface of the waters. I have brooded over it. I have sought to bring to life that which I determined as my life. I give all this, my life, back to you. I return all this to you. All things come from Adonai, and all things return to Adonai. I relinquish any hold, any tie, any reservation of self-will. I relinquish ownership to this life. I release all promises, all assurances, except one, the assurance of surrender. I resolve to not pick it up. That is my life. I resolve to not pick it up again. But if I do pick it up again, I resolve to surrender it again and again if necessary, until my surrender is complete. I will not take this, my own life, up again, but in your time, and only in your perfect will I receive the life that you have for me. Remember, Yeshua says, I came to bring you life, that life more abundantly. And we have, I think, tried to shape a little golem of abundance, a little statue of abundance, a little diorama of our life of abundance here in our cupped little hands. And then I breathe over it, and I try to bring it to life, and I hover over it, and I try to make it happen. I said, I surrender this to you. I kneel down to place this bundle of broken pieces, the shattered remains of my self-determined life, at your feet. I said, I open my eyes, I let go, I stand up, and I step back. And so it's the image of taking this bundle of this mess, broken pieces, shattered remains of what I had determined. It's the imagery of the young child going to the father and say, I broke it and I don't know how to fix it. You take it and I let it down, I set it down at his feet. I open my hands and I step back. And I've left behind that which I thought was my life. I've left behind that which identified me. And I said this, Adonai God, please make my words true. Please make my surrender complete. If you would like a copy of this prayer, reach out to me in the comments or send me an email. I think my email address is in there in the description. And I'd be happy to share this with you. It's you can modify it to suit your preference if you like, if it's of any value whatsoever to you. So I'll offer that to you. So this is the nature. This is what Adonai calls us to. If you're a Gentile, you've been grafted into the vine of David. We are all Israel. Believers in Yeshua are grafted into Israel. So this is what I believe, is that just our relationship with Adonai at times resembles that of Jacob, where we're wrestling for this identity and for this identity to be resolved. Again, just remember this image of going down into the dust and coming up. And coming up new, created in the image that Adonai wanted you to be created in the beginning. Yeah, sometimes we need a reset. Sometimes we need to be recreated. And I think that's what we do when we chafe and when we wrestle and when we're looking for God to create us, but we're struggling with Him because we want Him to create us in the image of what we want, and He already has an image that He's created us in, and it can be challenging to surrender to that image. So I leave you that tonight. Some interesting material and some real discussion here. If you're interested in discussing this further, please reach out to me. I would love to field any questions that you might have. Again, Skip Moen's book, The Crossing, A Struggle for Identity. Very good to have and read through slowly. He covers a lot of ground, and there's a lot of heavy lifting in there. So, but just a really good read. And I just pray that this is a blessing to you and continues to be a blessing to you. Again, if there's anything that you need, please let me know. And Adonai be with you and keep you this week. Shalom, shalom.